here that's going to be here. I am Lieutenant Ken Dickinson, and I'm the PIO for the Sheriff's Office. So I've talked to a few of you on the phone, and I'm meeting some for the first time. I appreciate your coming. What we want to announce today, as you saw in the press release, or the little teaser I sent out there, was that we have solved a 26-year-old homicide due to the great work of the men and women behind me here. So I'm going to introduce the folks that are behind me, and as they come up, I guess I'll ask you, do you want them to spell their name when they introduce themselves? Okay. So we'll have each of them come up, they'll introduce themselves, they'll spell their last name, and then they'll each have a few things. So behind me I have Sheriff John Giese, Sheriff of Kitsap County. Next to him is Lieutenant Chad Birkenfeld, who is our detectives lieutenant. Next to him is Detective Mike Grant, who is the lead investigator for this cold case homicide. Next to him is Under Sheriff Steve Duckworth. And next to him is the Chief of Detectives Russ Clithrow. And next to him is our Detective Sergeant Elizabeth Gundrum. We call her Elisa. So that's who's here today. I'll have the people that will be making remarks will be the sheriff, followed by Detective Lieutenant Birkenfeld, and then the lead investigator, Mike Grant, will also answer questions. So afterwards, there'll obviously be time for questions, so feel free to ask questions. And then once this is all wrapped up and said and done, we can be available for questions one-on-one if need be as well. So, all right, and everybody has a copy of the timeline and of the synopsis. Did everybody get one of those? Anybody need one? We have those available right up front here. All right, so without any further ado, I'm going to step out of the way and introduce our sheriff, John Giese.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'll be reading a short prepared statement here in just a minute, but let me spell my name. It's Sheriff John Giese, and the first name is John, and the last name is spelled Gese. In 2018, as a result of a renewed focus on investigation of cold cases by our detective division, we reopened our investigation into the 1995 killing of 61-year-old Patricia Lorraine Barnes. Barnes' unclothed and partially covered body was discovered by a passerby in rural South Kitsap County on August 25, 1995. After a lengthy investigation, our detectives were unable to determine a suspect in this murder. Given the great advances in genetic forensics, our detectives submitted DNA samples to the Washington State Crime Laboratory as well as private laboratories in Texas and Florida, and after 26 years, KCSO detectives have identified Barnes' killer as Douglas Keith Crone. We notified the family of Patricia Barnes on Monday about the identification of her killer, and they were very relieved to have some resolution to her death. This ultimate success of this investigation was a result of many, many hours of exhaustive police work by numerous detectives, investigators, deputies, officers, administrative support, and civilian personnel from a myriad of agencies around the state of Washington and the country. I am grateful for their hard work and dedication that brought an end to this arduous investigation and a measure of closure for Patricia Barnes' family as well as our community. At this time, I'd like to introduce Detective Lieutenant Chad Birkenfeld and lead case detective Mike Grant, who will go into more details about how this case was solved and will answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Giese. Good morning. My name is Chad Birkenfeld, Birkenfeld, and I'm the Detective Lieutenant for the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. I'd first like to recognize some retired detectives with us today. If you could raise your hand when I call your name. Retired Lieutenant of Detectives John Van Giesen, over on the side, and retired Detective Phil Abilly. If Phil could raise his hand. We wanted to invite them here today as well for their work on the case. I wanted to share how fortunate we are to work with a great team of dedicated professionals who do great work day in and day out. In 2018, Detective Mike Grant and Detective Dave Meyer, with the support of our command staff, reopened this case for further investigation. Their dedication, hard work, and attention to detail is what brings us here today. I would like to introduce Detective Mike Grant, who is lead on this investigation, to go into further details on why we're here today.
My name is Detective Mike Grant, Grant. As Sheriff Giese stated in his opening remarks, KCSO deputies and detectives responded to the 15,000 block of Peacock Hill Road on Friday, August 25th, 1995, where Patricia Lorraine Barnes' body was found alongside the road. She'd been shot in the head twice. And in a matter of speaking, this case was solved in 1995. The work done by detectives then is what solved this case. It wasn't until advances in forensic science and genetic genealogy becoming available most recently that we were able to resolve this case that they had started. Detectives did a thorough search of the area and recovered numerous pieces of evidence, and with the help of the Seattle Police Department, detectives did an exhaustive amount of follow-up, including contacting a witness who's believed to be the last person to see Barnes alive before her disappearance. This person was able to provide a description that led to the artist's rendering that you see displayed, but no solid leads were developed, and detectives were ultimately unsuccessful in identifying a suspect. During the course of the investigation, Robert Lee Yates, identified as the Spokane serial killer, was considered as a possible suspect due to similarities to this investigation and others that he was linked to. Yates was ultimately eliminated as a suspect because he was confirmed to have been stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama at the time of Barnes' murder. The case went cold for several years after the initial investigation due to a lack of leads and limitations on what forensic scientists could offer at the time. In April of 2018, with a renewed focus on solving cold cases by our division, this case was reopened. For the next 4 years, detectives conducted a thorough review of the case by reviewing photographs, re-examining physical evidence, and re-interviewing deputies and detectives who were involved in the initial investigation. Physical evidence was triaged and submitted to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, as well as 2 private labs, including Othram Labs of Woodlands, Texas, and DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach, Florida. DNA submissions to Othram Labs led to a common, unidentified male DNA profile. This was compared against the CODIS database of known offenders, with no match being found. The type, location, and circumstances of the biological containing material with this DNA profile strongly suggest that the contributing source was the person responsible for Barnes' death. Subsequent processes by Othram included forensic-grade genome sequencing and the use of forensic genealogy that involved searching genealogy databases for genetic relatives of this suspect profile. On December 22nd, 2021, Othram provided detectives with a potential name for the source DNA belonging to the suspect. Acting on this information, investigators followed up with the Nogales, Arizona Police Department, as well as the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office in Tucson, Arizona. At this time, it was determined that the potentially matching suspect had died of accidental causes in September of 2016. On December 29th, 2021, the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office provided the Sheriff's Office with a sample retained from the postmortem examination. This sample was later sent to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, and in January of this year, for comparison against the DNA profile for confirmation testing. On February 7th, 2022, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab confirmed that the DNA sample obtained from authorities in Arizona matched the suspect DNA profile, and he was identified as Douglas Keith Crone. Crone had previous addresses in both Seattle and Tacoma and would have been 33 years old at the time of the 1995 murder. Crone had significant criminal history in Washington State, including a 1984 conviction for first-degree robbery and an arrest in 1994 in Pierce County for kidnapping second degree. The investigation has not shown any previous connection or relationship between Barnes and Crone. And again, the successful conclusion of this case belongs to the initial investigative response by detectives in 1995. The success of modern investigative methods can only happen when they're built upon a thorough and professional foundation of good police work. Their work is reflected in their evidence collection, crime scene processing, exhaustive follow-up, countless interviewing, vetting of tips, and collaboration with numerous law enforcement agencies. Detectives in that initial investigation include retired Detective Ron Trogdon, who was the lead detective, retired Chief of Corrections and former Detective Ned Newland, retired Detective Lieutenant Jim Harris, and retired detectives Doug Wright, Smed Wagner, Dick Fuller, Fella Billy, Chuck Jones, and Rich Smith. The Kitsap County Sheriff's Office would also like to offer its sincere thanks and recognition to the following individuals and agencies for their assistance and support during this investigation. Catherine Heeman, Assistant Attorney General for the Washington State Attorney General's Office. Lindsay Wade and Marty Hill, Senior Investigators for the Washington State Attorney General's Office. Jennifer Vendito, Forensic Scientist, Washington State Patrol Crime Lab in Seattle. Michael Malden and Samantha Connect with the Harris County District Attorney's Office in Houston, Texas. Michael Vogan and the forensic team at Othram Incorporated, Woodlands, Texas. DNA Labs International, Deerfield Beach, Florida. Anna Ariza, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney, Kitsap County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. Nicholas Acevedo, Sergeant, Nogales Police Department. Sonia Molina, Investigator with the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office. Alex Sheng, Special Agent, NCIS. Angela Van Loo, Photographic Imaging Unit, King County Sheriff's Office. Marty Garland, Detective, Bremerton Police. Rick Grabenstein, Retired Detective, Spokane County Sheriff's Office. David White, Retired Chief of Detectives, Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. John Van Giesen, Retired Detective Lieutenant, Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. Kathy Chiddington, Retired Investigative Assistant, Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. Trina Washburn, Retired Investigative Assistant, Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. And Elena Kasner, Investigative Analyst with South Sound 911 in Pierce County. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Can you tell us a little bit about who informed the family and how that went and what it was like?
Yeah, so through the course of the investigation, I did not reach out to them, and the plan was to only contact them if it was solved, just to avoid kind of, going back in time and rekindling something, giving false hope. And so that was the plan, and so on Monday, I reached out to one son that lived in Spokane, in the Spokane area, and he kind of made a telephone tree and contacted three of his siblings, and I've spoken with three of them total over the course of the last 2 days.
How does that make you feel to be able to do what you've done? I know people played a part in it, but you made that call.
It was shocking, honestly. I hadn't really been looking forward to how that would go, but it was emotional, yeah.
What was their reaction?
The same thing, they were shocked. And they knew why I was calling, so, but they were very grateful.
One question.
Sure.
When it was discovered that phone had passed in September of 2016, did that take away from any of your activities with the investigation? Anything like that?
No, I think that the goal has always just been a resolution, and knowing that this case is 26 years old, that was always a possibility. The family didn't seem to mind that there was no one being arrested for it. I think they just wanted justice, not vengeance, just like us.
When was race excluded as a suspect?
It would be an approximate, maybe about 2 years ago. Very early on, I reached out to Marty Hill, who currently is an investigator with the Attorney General's Office, and he was retired from the Spokane Police Department and happened to work on the Spokane Serial Task Force, so he was intimately familiar with it. And due to the similarities, obviously, with the pattern of crime and some of the circumstances, he was considered. And he knew exactly what I was looking for. Over the course of that entire investigation, they tried to recreate Robert Yates' life to the day so they could account for it, whether it was receipts or military records or any sort of documentation. And since he was in the military, they had quite a bit of information on his service record, and he was a helicopter pilot, and he was stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama for the end of August and most of September, so he was excluded very early on.
Looking at the sketch and looking at him, that's pretty good. What was your reaction when you had a name and you looked up the picture and you compared it to the sketch?
Yeah, it was the same as yours. I was surprised. It was a very accurate rendering, and it kind of goes back in time and freezes that moment in time what that witness saw and gave to Detective Wagner. And the booking photo is from 1994, so it was a year before the actual crime, but it's strikingly similar. It would just be a guess. Neither one of them had any connection to the area. I don't know if it was just to dispose of her body out of the area to kind of limit any sort of connections to him or to confuse investigators. It's really hard to say. I wish I knew.
She was pretty well known in the Seattle Pioneer Square area.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Just from reading witness accounts, she was kind of an outgoing person and had never met a stranger. Kind of struck me as a person that would just interact with someone that they had just met and befriend them quite easily, which may well be how they met, because we didn't find any other connection. Either they both happened to live in Seattle, maybe a few blocks or half mile at different times, but the connection we weren't able to discern. But it's hard to say. We do not. His name is not mentioned in any of the police reports. I went through all of the tips that we received, and his name isn't mentioned anywhere in there. It could just be a...
You were saying something about Crone having an extensive criminal background in Seattle and Tacoma. Do you all know if you all are finding any other incidents that might be connected to Crone?
Yeah, so since it was kind of confusing earlier on, because I think he had 4 or 5 felony convictions. He was arrested for a robbery in 1984 and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And you do the math. 3 years later, he got arrested. There was an order for him to compel on one of his convictions for DNA, and it was never collected, or it would have been in CODIS. So the fact that it's not in CODIS was frustrating early on. To answer your question more directly, is he related to other crimes? He certainly could be, and I'm working with the Attorney General's office with their SACI initiative to make sure that his DNA profile is entered into CODIS. So if there's any other submissions by law enforcement that maybe will match that. So that's in progress. But is there anything definitive? The answer is no. Yeah.
So he died down in Arizona. Can you tell us what he died of? Was he in jail when he died, or?
No, it was an accident. He lived in Nogales, which is a small town in southern Arizona, and he had enlisted the help of a neighbor. I believe he lived in a trailer park, and they were rigging up some giant TV antenna and happened to put it into the power lines. And his neighbor survived, but Crone died almost instantly at the scene.
After this, and how much jail time did he serve in between the murder and when he passed? Was he in jail quite a bit, or did he kind of clean up, or?
I really couldn't say. Any other questions? Anyone?
How many cases is the department looking at as part of this 2018 list?
I believe we have approximately 15 cold cases. Since April of 2018, I know that all of them have been looked at to a certain extent. And obviously, depending on the investigation that was done initially, how old it is, what type of evidence is available. You know, the older a case gets, the less you're going to solve it through an interview, and it's going to be solved through forensics. So there's always limitations. DNA wasn't a thing in the 70s, so if we have a case from the 70s, people weren't processing cases with that interest in mind. But I'm aware that all of them have been either assigned that have a degree of solvability, like this one, just through the advances of forensic science, or if they've been discounted. But I believe we have 15.
And is this the first of those 15 to be solved?
I believe this is the second or third. Yeah, sure.
Detective Grant would be correct. There's currently 15 cold cases, and 3 have been solved. This would be the third, probably the most advanced and in-depth work done. And all the cases are currently assigned to investigators to review and to continue to go through.
Any other questions at all?
Okay, no other questions? All right, so this will conclude the formal presentation part of it. If any of you has any specific questions that you'd like to talk to any of the investigators or administration, they'll all be available to do that one-on-one if you'd like. And I'll be sure to, if you want to take down my phone number, if you have any follow-up questions a little bit later, you can get a hold of me, Ken Dickinson, Dickinson. My office number is 360-337-5698. And, or you can reach me at my email of kdickins@co.kitsap.wa.us. Okay? Thank you. We appreciate your coming.